Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for phoning in. This is our third session for the IBIU BIM course entitled BIM for Architects. And this follows up in the series of sessions that we're going to be holding throughout the year, culminating in December. So just a reminder that IBI is a registered provider for continuing education with the American Institute of Architects. So what we're asking is anybody on who's an AIA member, please enter your AIA number into the questions pane so that it shows up in the course attendee list. All other members, OAA, AIBC, AAA, etc., your certificates will still be printed, but the AIA members automatically have their learning units sent to the AIA system. Okay, so BIM for Architects, this course or this session is going to focus specifically on the harnessing of BIM for architects. The previous courses started with the fundamentals, looking at, very briefly what BIM could do, focusing more on goals and potentials. The next set of courses are going to really focus specifically on uses for specific professions. So from the architectural perspective, we're going to look to see, how can it be harnessed to bring efficiency to architecture as a whole, understand how to take an execution plan and apply its principles to the development of architectural information, understand some of the unique benefits, and imagine the potential. So simple objectives here, but what I want to do is kind of get rid of the myth that, BIM brings so much that it could actually impede or hinder the development or the production of architectural content. So a quick recap. This is the same definition I gave in the other sessions. BIM is both a noun and a verb simultaneously. As a verb, it's the process of generating and managing digital representations of physical and functional characteristics of spaces. In another way, I say BIM is nothing more than a digital collection of assets, or a digital collection of components that make up a building. So from an architectural perspective, think about that when you design. Anything that takes up space that was on a drawing is now in a model, and it interrelates to the other components surrounding it. BIM, the noun, is the model itself, so the files that contain information that have to be exchanged and networked to support decision-making about a place, or a collection of components, or a component itself. The intent is for BIM to be harnessed and utilized throughout the life cycle of a project or the life cycle of the components or the assets themselves. And it can be applied as a building, a linear infrastructure, or a system, thus fulfilling the I, the B, and the I for the firm. Collaboration and planning is the most critical part of BIM. You have to be able to share the information, whether it's with the person beside you or the person across the globe, within IBI or outside IBI, and you have to know what you're sharing and why you're sharing it. So that's where the planning comes into play. My graphical something plus a bit of data gives you BIM. That's all BIM is in a nutshell. That bit of data could be a lot of data, a little bit of data, whatever is required. Later on in this presentation, I talk about the door. And from an architectural perspective, scheduling of doors is something that we've done for a very long time. And you can harness BIM depending on how much data you put in the model in order to help facilitate that. BIM can also geospatially connect components to the infrastructure within which they lie. So here the guardrail sits within the bridge, which sits within the road, which sits within the overall connectivity or a network of roads. So that's what this is showing, the macro to the micro and vice versa. I think it's important to note that not all of your projects, or not even a majority of projects, will take into account full life cycle information and harnessing full geospatial coordination. But conceptually, if you think, anything I put in the model could one day now or down the road need some type of digital connectivity to something else. And what does that mean? What does that mean for the profession going forward? And what does that mean for me today? I'm just going to keep monitoring the questions as we go along. Okay. Building focused BIM, it's multidiscipline BIM, so the disciplines are modeling in the same virtual space. The first three were the engineering disciplines and then architectural, and they all come together. So this session, as I said, is focusing on the architects, and the next session will focus on some of the engineering aspects. You can cut your model, slice it and dice it, get a list of content, do your clashes, and I always stress the BIM doesn't solve your clashes, it just shows you your clashes. You can generate drawings, sections, schematics, visualization, etc. The concept of life cycle information, you put a component in the model, it has a unique identifier, and that unique identifier then can then relate to other information. So whether it's a door, a valve, a column, whatever it is, if it's identified uniquely in a form or another, it can link via some type of a life cycle management system. We talked about BIM uses in previous sessions. Now this, I want to stress something here. Those base BIM uses are probably the majority to this day that are being used when we say we're doing BIM. So everything around this wheel are all the possibilities, but in reality, we're only most often going to be doing drawings and schedules, visualization, and design review. So this session we're going to focus on those specifically, yet, I just want to stress that it's not always the case. So, planning for BIM is very important because on the onset, we should be utilizing BIM tools in order to become more efficient in order to produce drawings and schedules. And when we talk about all the possibilities around this wheel, I always like to stress to say they're all good, but we still need to produce our deliverable. That is the criticality of today, and quite frankly, if we cannot produce our drawings efficiently, we're kind of defeating the purpose on why we're pushing BIM forward. We talked about level of detail, and I term it the latest buzzword because it's finding its way into contracts, and it's trying to push more responsibility to the designers in order to put stuff in the model. But just to be very critical, and I like this example here with the steel beams. We'll design buildings, we'll show walls and floors and columns and beams, but the actual connectivity of some components, or getting into starting to imply the means and methods on how things are going to be put together, falls in the realm of the contractors. So what I like to say is when we're looking at our proposals, anything above an LOD 300, which is what I term in North America, good enough to get to our contract documents, stop, pause, raise your hand and say, hold on, why are you asking for more? What's the cost implications for doing more, and the liability implications, especially on projects where it's a design bid project. On design build, we do see more and more requests to do more in our models in order to make our contractor clients' lives a little more seamless. But again, there's liability issues there that have to be addressed as well. In the UK, they term it level of detail, and they have 3 grades. So I wanted to show this as well because they go from schematic to concept defined and render. Now, the idea there is show what you need to show within the model. So similar to the North American LODs, you want to make sure you're not putting too much in the model that's not required. Here, we'll get to the visualization slides later on in this presentation, but we want to make sure that there's enough in the model that the visualization team, if we're doing advanced visualizations, have enough to go upon when they pull the models into their tools, but also that there's enough so that when you're doing design review, you can actually visualize optically what's actually occurring within the project itself. And again, they define the level of definition, which corresponds to North America's schematic design, design development, contract documents, etc., or corresponding to 30, 60, 90, 100. So I've done some slides in the past where we actually compare the two, but conceptually know where you are within your project, whether you're in concept, design, contract documents, construction, and ensure that the level of information, the quality of the information as well as the quantity of information corresponds to the phase of the project so that you're not going above and beyond the budgets as well as the scope requirements for the specific project. So what's the flavor of BIM? And I ask that because as architects, when we approach modeling, there's different types of things we can do. So there's Big BIM. This is a previous project of mine where there was a little bit of everything, multidiscipline, full service engineering. It was an industrial project, so piping was driving the space, and the space was sitting on the site interrelating to a lake to the south. So there was a lot happening here. Everything modeled, quantified, pulled together, etc. So you can do big BIM. You can also do little BIM. Now, little BIM is interesting because oftentimes I get into discussions on whether or not a project is too small to be BIMmed. This is using BIM as the verb. And I take the approach that there's quite literally is nothing, there isn't any project that's too small. So this was a porch design that I worked on, and I modeled what was to be demolished, and I modeled what was to be built, generating basic quantities. And the simplicity of this was, the model meant I didn't have to produce any drawings because they were able to visualize, and the simple quantities meant the owner was able to quite literally go to Home Depot and buy the right amount of material and order the right demolition bin so that he didn't have to order twice. Simple as that. So when I think of scoping this BIM project, there wasn't a lot to it at all. And you could look at this and say, well, you could have easily drawn it, probably. But for me, it was easier just to do a part model, to get all my eggs in one basket, and it was able to be delivered. This one here was a facade using the model to portray different materiality to convey it to a golf course owner. So the idea here was, this in itself became part of the deliverable. So I had my drawing set, but I also had this material drawing, color print of the model inserted into the project, part of the deliverable set. Oftentimes we may not do that, but it was an option that was put in place, bringing the model into the deliverable set and also bringing the model up to the client early on enough in the project so that the materiality was cast in stone by the time we hit the CD phase for the post 60% phase. And I would argue with our models today, conceptually, any 3D representation in models is always possible, just as long as it's done correctly. We can bring concept models into BIM. So this is a SketchUp model that was provided from CanWest. We were able to take the SketchUp model, and with tools now today, we can start to pull models into the Autodesk or the Bentley platforms and either just use them for querying or visualization / design review, or to harness the content to further them into full-fledged BIM models to start to produce deliverables. I would say it's always sketchy, if you will, when you're playing with conceptual models and trying to pull them into tools like Revit or EcoSim or ArchiCAD, but at least there's the framework in place that you can start to do that. Maybe 5 years ago, these would almost have been throwaway models because they would be brought, a SketchUp model, for example, would be brought into a BIM tool as unintelligent surfaces. Now it's actually recognizable, and they can be brought in via IFC file transfer or via direct import to certain tools. So I'm showing Navigator at the bottom left there, and then you can start to actually use them as a foundation for the development of BIM models. So that's exciting on how that's come along. In the civil world, there's also InfraWorks, which has a similar functionality where you can start to develop something conceptually and pull it into Civil 3D. So in the overall BIM world, that started to be facilitated, which is pretty exciting. Interiors focused BIM. So there's been, our interior practice has been onboarding Revit globally, which is great. This is a project that I've worked on in the past where, the exterior or the shell of the room was already done. It was a kitchen reno. So we had what type of material and cabinets wanted to put in place, generation of some quick plans to give to a fabricator, plans and elevations, some quick renderings, very rudimentary, but enough to convey the message to the client. Some fabrication pieces for some specific, these were stainless steel wall panels that we wanted developed in one piece with the cutouts for the hoods and the gas connection and the electrical, etc., but also using thick gauge stainless steel so we didn't get any oil canning. So it was a pretty expensive piece of steel. Wanted to make sure that the cutouts were right because the homeowner wouldn't have been able to cut it on site. And we were able to generate quantities. So we were able to get a good estimate on not only the number of cabinets, which the fabricator was able to take, but also the linear footage for crown molding, for base molding, square footage for tiles, even area of walls for painting, all pulled off of the model just because the model was there. So, one thing I would say as an architect is we always want to be careful of how much of this is conveyed out, especially on design bid projects, because there is issues about liability and what you're held accountable for in part of your delivery. But just to show the capabilities of what can be done in the right setup, the right contractual arrangement, this all just came out of the model into a spreadsheet, a little bit of formatting, highlighting, and there's my quantities. So it's pretty powerful. And then the before and after of what was produced, the demolish and the rebuild. So again, that's, if you imagine any of our interior build-outs, that's always a possibility. Conceptually, this is what we're trying to achieve. So even though it's, this presentation is focusing architecturally, that whole multidiscipline concept, we want to be able to build around virtually all of the components that come into play and impact the architects as a discipline, and vice versa, to ensure that there is that continuity between all of the design disciplines on any specific project. So with that said, design review as a goal, as a BIM use, is probably the most important immediate benefit for any BIM project. So you have a model, whether it's Revit or whatever other tool that could be at play on a project. Everybody's designing together. What do we do with it? So from that initial example, the coordinated model brings those disciplines together. So I like showing these because these are potentially 4 different models, maybe one model with work sets, whatever the setup is. These all come together and they all have to fit. Days of yesterday, I always look and say, well, how did we ever build anything without BIM? And obviously we did, but there was the overlaying of I would say, siloed streams of CAD data, and then even worse, of pencil data on the board. And those drawings had to be overlaid, brought together to ensure that there weren't any clashes and that the continuity and everything just fit together. So that's what BIM does. There's different options on how to do it, on how to bring tools together. What I'm going to show are just two diagrams on how to do this here. So one of the tools we have is Navisworks, and I know there's several within IBI that either have previous experience with Navisworks or are using it currently. What's great about Navisworks is it can pull a lot of files together. So let's say you have an interiors model that's in AutoCAD, a building model in Revit, and a civil model in Civil 3D, and engineering models in Revit or something else. Navisworks can pull everything together. It can all be spatially in the right spot, and you can do excellent geometric review. You do get some data loss for non-Autodesk content. So what I mean by that is, let's say you had a sub-consultant using Graphisoft ArchiCAD or Bentley EcoSim. You can pull their models in, and they would sit on top of each other and look good, but Navisworks may not know that a wall is a wall. You'll see it, so you visually would know, but the data may not be there. Whereas if it's all Autodesk products, it will know that a Revit wall is a Revit wall, or an AutoCAD MEP duct is a duct, etc. So there is that data continuity. On a lot of our major BIM projects, we've used Navisworks to pull information together from multiple sources. It also helps that there is a free viewer for Navisworks called Navisworks Freedom. So if you are sending a combined model to a client or another stakeholder and they don't have Revit or any Revit capabilities, you can send them a Navisworks file and they can open it, view it, navigate, etc. Another option available is Bentley's Navigator. So Navigator, Bentley and Autodesk are two competing vendors. Autodesk is probably much more well known. But the Navigator model is intriguing as a design review tool because it creates what's called an I model, and it pulls in geometry plus information from various vendors. So in Revit, you can have an I model plugin. Same within AutoCAD, in MicroStation, in Tekla, and a bunch of other tools. So they target specific vendors and they focus on ensuring that the geometry comes with the data so everything is seen together. Also, Navigator's got a pretty cool mobile application that allows you to drive through these I models, kind of like very similar to any gaming console. So that's pretty slick. This Navigator tool is used heavily by a lot of the transportation entities. So when we're working on mass transit projects, often there's a MicroStation deliverable, so it's all Bentley based. And even if we're using Autodesk applications, we can still facilitate Bentley review with them utilizing these plugins. There's also live model review. So as an architect, you say, okay, great, that sounds good. That sounds like a whole other work process imposed on my project. Well, you can just basically open up Revit and you can just start to analyze, shift things around, coordinate with your modeler, ensure that as a team, what's going inside the Revit model is what you're expecting to see. So that happens a lot as well, and that's why I've noticed there's maybe lesser use of Navisworks than I would have thought, because oftentimes we're doing review just live in the Revit model itself. The drawback of this, you just got to be careful of, is as I'm changing this door here, if I delete it by mistake or put it to something wrong and sync it back, well, that's live on the project. So we've just got to be careful with that. Similar things can happen with civil review. So from an architect's perspective, looking at a site plan, so if civil creates a 3D terrain model and situates your project on site, you can review it, analyze the impacts, ensure that there's proper code requirements for fire truck access or access to fire hydrants, etc., depending on what's been modeled from the civil perspective and the relationship between the building model and any models that exist. Whether it's a 2D model or a 3D model, you can use live review tools to pull them together. Heavily, and this is happening right now, this is an example from the Eglinton project, point cloud review with your live model. So this is very powerful and also very challenging at the same time. So from a very high level, you get a point cloud done, you reference it in or link it into your model, they come side by side and you review, and it sounds absolutely perfect. But there's a challenge. You've got to make sure that the validity of the point cloud, the geospatial location of the point clouds relative to the true location, relative to the Revit working environment. And when they all come together, you can then start to visualize and review based on what you're seeing on the screen here. So using tools like Autodesk Recap to ready the point clouds, and then most BIM authoring tools, Revit, EcoSim, ArchiCAD, etc., can take live point cloud information as a file format and live link to the active BIM models. So here you can see the modeled column versus the point clouded column seems to be a little bit off, and you can make adjustments accordingly. Point clouds are really large, so depending on how they're processed and pulled together and made available, I just want to be careful on how you link, how live the link stays so that it maintains a workable model throughout the duration of the project or the use of the content. But it is very powerful, and the BIM team will help if we're able to harness these on any given project. You can do live, again, design review relative to a drawing. So this is an example I've used for years. Here's a section, looks fine. but this is the actual model of where the section is being cut. And I like this example because when I see what's inside the model, you know, the section really just doesn't do it justice. So that I like to show the difference here of, you know, you can either have them side by side on deliverables or have the sheet files with access to the model when you're conveying the message to a stakeholder or a reviewer, just to enrich the experience and make resulting decisions that much more meaningful with information like this. I'm going to run this video, and I cannot open the file. I guess I'm not going to run this video. I had it. All right, we'll skip that. This was just going to show in the MicroStation environment a live a live walkthrough of the model. But this is typical, again, of any file, whether it's Revit, EcoSim, nodes, ArchiCAD. You can set up any viewpoint, turn on a perspective, and then just walk through the interface in order to experience the space. And maybe it's better it didn't open, because over GoTo it probably would have not portrayed very well. So making life easier. So when I think of BIM, I think, okay, great, you can review, you can see things, but now I've got to get down and do my work. So as an architect, I presented this to the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada a couple times, and I thought, you know, what better way to show why we BIM other than focusing on a door? And, you know, the door has been a thorn in the architect side for a while. But, you know, when I look at it, I say, okay, understand BIM. What is it? What's the data I need? What does the object look like? What does the software do for me? And then what additional things do I need to do? So the what is it? Is it a door, window, wall, slab, etc.? I've got to know what it is. I've got to know where it resides. So model the space it takes up. Don't dwell on the frivolous. With doors, I can spend days modeling the right hinges and doorknobs and all of that, but they're all spec items. I just need to know where the door is. Know what the BIM authoring tool will do. So if I'm in Revit or EcoSim or ArchiCAD and I hit place door, what does it force me to do? That goes to software training. So that will help me to understand when I'm placing a door in the model, this is what it forces. And then what else do I need? So if I have the door in the model, if I do any additional information, will it help me out down the road? So think of 2D, and I kind of did this once counting the clicks. Draw the frame, copy the frame, draw the leaf, draw the swing. Maybe 12 clicks. Same with elevation, frame, leaf, door, swing. So you can do that. That's all good. In section, frame, leaf, frame and elevation, and I have my section. That's quite a bit of clicks. I don't like too many clicks, so that I never enjoyed doing that, but we all did that. Then there's a spec, and there could be multiple specs if you have aluminum door, hollow metal door, maybe an FRP door, stainless steel door, wood door, other, who knows. So there could be a whole bunch of specs, and then there's a schedule. Schedule could be Word, or I used to have firms where we would draw them in CAD, and drawing them in CAD I always thought was very painful, but it's all good. And we had our door data. We had little pieces of data everywhere. So how do we make it better? So we created some standard cells. So to reduce those 34 clicks, so you place the cell in plan, section, and elevation, etc. Make libraries so you can pull it all together. Maybe update based on attributes and tags. Try to make master specs for doors and hardware, so at least I'm pulling from a master spec. And then we could standardize our schedules. So that sounds good, but what do we do in the 3D world to make it better? So this is where, why would I BIM my building, right? And here's just a simple floor plate example. You know, doors placed parametrically, cutting your holes into the walls, 2 to 4 clicks, parametric control of glass frames, rough opening. I can swap out doors, build different families, replace them. A lot of amazing things you can do just with the door alone. The other thing is the data. The data is huge. So not only does it carry parametric information, this is a screenshot from EcoSim. The previous one was from Revit, but just to show they're all the same. You place a door, it carries information. It shows up in plan, section, elevation in 3D with one placement, not multiple. So that alone, I would say to architects, why would I want to model? This is a huge reason why modeling is good. But the other one is this information. You can start to build data parameters that would bring direct alignment to specs and schedules. So this is huge for me because I can then press a button and get my door schedule. And that's a different thing, right? So instead of having to build it in Word, build it on CAD, I just query the model, show me all my doors, color, finishes, glass, the door number built in, the door type, fire rating, everything is input. Some of it could come automatically from the families if it's built in. If it's all just parameters or data fields specific to the object, it's keyed in upon placement or thereafter once you've designed the buildings, and you can generate schedules accordingly. The more this gets automated, the easier it is. So component once, utilize it for the basis for visualization in your plan, section, elevation, schedules. The data allows for updating of geometry plus data, and you have confidence that everything that you've modeled will be scheduled. I've spent hours with architects in the past going through what was in for quality checks, what's in my drawings, what's on my schedule, what's in my spec, and you find that missing door, etc. So here, if it's listed as a door, it shows up as a door and it gets modeled. So for me, this is huge. And I just want to dwell on that for one more second. Later on in the BIM courses, we're going to talk about BIM linkage to specifications. And we have the ability to eventually help to draw upon and create project specs based on the components placed. So that concept of the doors that are placed, you can take that, further it, and all of this from one simple placement versus separate streams of information. So for me, that's very powerful, and that's an idea there where you think of LOD 300. I need to place the door to get my contract documents, but if I put a little more information onto that door, a little more simplicity occurs with respect to schedule generation and maybe spec integration. So there's a balance there, but it's all about efficiency, and as I have here, don't lose sight of your deliverable. So what is the deliverable? Why am I BIMing? No matter what around that wheel, let's say we're doing simulations, clash detection, asset management, whatever all the other things are, we're still making that sheet. So this is a graphic I made a long time ago. Develop BIM, slice, you get your plans and sections, and then you make your sheet. And then it goes to be constructed. This is likely never going to change for a long time until the requirement for drawings disappears from the building industry. I'm not sure when that's going to happen, but it will one day. But the concept is you've got your multiple models. You have your discipline models that are all coming together as shown previously. Creating this master file, this is more of a Bentley term, I believe, but the concept is you're cutting your views, your plans, sections, elevations, and then they go on to sheets. So it's all starting in this BIM model, modeling what's there to take up space, LOD 300, so it's got to be the right size, geospatially relative to its adjacent components, so it appears correctly in the views and thus can be placed on various sheets. You can slice your model anywhere, and that's another huge benefit of BIM. I remember my last 2D project. I remember very late in the game an engineer saying, "Hey, Mr. Architect, can you draw me another section?" And I kept saying if I had a model, it would be a click of the button and it'd get all the base. But instead, I had to, reference, draw the missing pieces, extrapolate what had to be done, and it was painful in my opinion. Whereas knowing that I can just go anywhere along this structure and cut whatever I need at any moment. You can generate different types of drawings, plan viewed for programmatic, planimetric 3D views, sections, elevations, isometrics, the premise for, or the basis for details, all from the same components. The C sheets, these are showing, this is a UK example, C sheets showing the arrangement of components within a structure. I like this example. They made this over there because it shows you update it in one spot and it updates everywhere. That's the other beauty of BIM. So why would I do it? Because of the efficiency. How do I become more efficient? Here's one of the examples. Once I have this thing laid out, I can shift, twist, and turn, and everything gets updated, including my schedule of components, if done correctly and intelligently. So this is, for me, as architect, I honestly can't imagine not having this technology, because the duplication and the coordination that's just removed from having the overall process is wholly beneficial. Develop your plans, elevations. Now here, elevations are intriguing because the modeling tools also give you different presentation possibilities as well. So you could turn on shaded color type looks. So it's almost, I don't know if rudimentary is the right word, but it's base level visualization of my content based on the BIM tool itself. So obviously different tools have different capabilities. That's why they compete with each other, but I'm very fond of stuff like this, the sketch mode. So I give an elevation, make it look sketchy, so that at 10% design it actually conveys a sketch elevation versus an actual 90% elevation. So there's a lot of things you can do with that. Developing your sections. The level of detail of what you see in your sections will be dependent on what's built up inside your wall types and ceiling types. So keep that in mind. If you're using generic walls, so you know your wall's 200 millimeters wide and you just have a 200 millimeter simple wall, it'll show up simple. If you break that up to have multiple components, brick, airspace, insulation, concrete wall backup, it will show all four of those as a sandwich. So it just depends on how done. And then you can get your details. And I don't know, in the first BIM session, I talked a bit about the myth of details, in that what you see here, you don't get that from a click of a button. So you can get the premise of your details, and then there's what I like to call a detail overlay. So if you envision modeling is what you would get at 1 to 50, maybe 1 to 25, so that's quarter inch or quarter inch, or just a little greater in imperial. Then if you're getting to a 1 to 5 or a 1 to 10 detail, so a half inch or greater detail, you have to add the detail overlay. So you add more information so that it conveys it. But the beauty of that is, if the slab thickens or moves or the wall moves, that backbone will show over the detail, and then you know you have to adjust your detail overlay accordingly. So that's the benefit of using the BIM model, even for the basis of the details, specifically for project-specific details where it's dependent on the geometry. And you can show phasing as well. So this, phasing of how either something's to be built, occupied, maintained, or finished. It just depends on. It's just different metadata and a different phasing overlay to the model's content itself. And different tools do it differently, whether you're using Revit versus Navigator versus EcoSim versus ArchiCAD. Let's talk visualization now. So I focused a bit on design review and drawing production, because that is what we do BIM for, and we want to be efficient. But because there's a model, it will be visualized. And I remember from the very first time I modeled, somebody said, "Oh, that's good, can you send me that?" And the simplest visualization, print screen, paste in the email, and send. Nothing special, but it just allowed the recipient of my email to visualize the model. Nothing special, no rendering, no materiality, just the 3D. But in IBI, we actually have a full visualization service. So I want to separate this now to make sure we have clarity. There's model visualization, as I said, the print screen. Open up the model and look at it. So optically visualizing what's happening in the design. And then there's artistic visualization, or visualization as a specific deliverable, which is what we have a full group focusing on here in IBI. These slides were from a previous webinar just focusing on the visualization. But we do models and renderings, full animation, a lot of work right now with virtual reality and advanced media, and also the development of physical models. And the physical models, we have a 3D printer, laser cutter, but we have some painting artists as well, which I'll chat about in a moment. We have various levels. So the idea of building these levels is to say, you know what, the first 3 levels can probably be, definitely the first 2, and maybe up to level 3, can be facilitated within the studios or the architectural offices themselves. So you have your BIM model, you add some materiality, some lights, you develop an output, and you deliver to your stakeholder. Level 4 and 5 is what we call the advanced visualization, and we have a specific team that's governed globally to focus on bringing BIM models, whether they're from Revit or Civil 3D or other sources, into tools like 3D Studio Max, generate animations, full-fledged visualization, V-Ray ray tracing, or the virtual reality. We've done some experimentation with the Oculus Rift, as well as with a company called KISP that uses the Samsung device in order to build that virtual environment. The idea there is the submersible experience where you're integrated into the model and you're able to experience the space. There's a lot of potential there in the future of BIM, taking that immersible space, the VR side, and plugging in the information so that as you touch objects, components, or assets, you're able to experience the asset information while performing the advanced virtual walkthrough. So there's some fusion still to come with respect to the advancing visualization as well as integrating information, and then how that's delivered to not only your project stakeholders, but beyond into the vastness of the digital world, in the whole concept of the Internet of Things, smart cities, and how all of that gels and fuses together. So there's a lot of potential there down the road. That's I think a whole nother, actually there's a future of BIM session later on in the year, and we'll talk much more about that, I think. So just some examples here of some of the rendering capabilities that can be, or rendering outputs that can be generated. It depends on your flavor, what you're trying to convey. The visualization team, they're very strong in identifying the effects and the uniquenesses of the work they do, sharing the information, and making sure that we have a real powerful global network that can actually facilitate this type of work. The 3D printing, I think I showed this in the first session, but it's just taking our models, prepping them. So you export from a BIM tool to something like an FBX or an STL file format. It has to get prepped, readied, and then sent into the laser printer, into the laser cutter or the 3D printer, and then assembled by our model builders. And this platform is one that's on display here in Toronto. It takes some effort, but some clients really like that. Before I get to analysis, one other skill that we have here, there's a recent hire who is a watercolor artist. So we've been able to take a Revit view, print it on watercolor paper using one of our printers. She then did a watercolor painting on top of it, but the line work from the Revit view still perpetuates through, so the watercolor doesn't bleed the line work, and then we're now going to scan that and we can deliver that digitally and in person as a watercolor. So it's bringing that artistic touch to digital media and fusing together, so I think that's very powerful as well as a potential. And then lastly, this is the last section I wanted to touch upon, and this doesn't by any means identify everything you can do with BIM, obviously, but from a conceptual perspective, I think it gives a pretty good flavor. There's tools out there that do some energy analysis. So this example here is Sefaria that we've done some exploration with out of our Portland office. The idea there is you can pull a model into their environment, do some analysis, and push it back out. So, it has some pluses, and, part of the thing with these analytical tools is to really understand their potential, their cost, and then the return on the investment. and then weigh that against your project budget, what you're doing, and what you want to be liable for as an architect. So that was part of the question here, doing an energy analysis. We, the architect, how much of this should we be doing? If we're doing sustainability and trying to prove the LEED credit, there's some value to doing an analysis against the ASHRAE standard, but beyond that, we want to just be careful how much analyzing we actually do. Your model, though, could be taken by others. So I dwell on this a little more in the BIM for Engineers session, but as an architect, be aware, you could be asked, hey, send me the Revit model so that I can analyze the space, the structural loading, and if you have structural components in your model, then, if the engineer is trying to take your model and utilize it, there's some, I don't know if risk is the right word, but just got to make sure there's clear communication that as architect, we've modeled what we want to see. The engineer needs to actually model what they need to have. Same with the lighting analysis. So this one is very heavily dependent on the spaces itself. So the engineer can place lighting components and set the lights, but it's dependent on, are my walls hitting my ceiling? Do I have closed spaces? Am I having any light leakage throughout the building? Is glazing listed as glazing and all opaque listed accordingly? And all of that will come into play and enrich or make the lighting analysis work. If it's not done right, the analysis will fail and therefore shouldn't be done. So it's very careful when we say an LOD 300 model, there's really the implication there that it's done right. And I think that's something that a lot of architects there's a little bit of fear there, because how liable are we for doing it right? And at the end of the day, we're still stamping our drawings, which is the output from the model and the representation in a PDF, industry standard contract documents, but what about these subtle dependencies, especially on design bid projects, design bid build, where my model is being used by others to validate or drive designs, assuming my information is correct. Now, when we turn over digital data, I stress to everybody, please make sure if it goes outside of IBI, you grab that waiver form that says, I am not liable, you're using this at your own risk, blah, blah, blah. It's a nice legal document. Even with that, I'm sure we'll get yelled at if there's something wrong, but at least we have that legal backing saying, I am giving you this digital information, but if it's wrong, it's wrong. So, the other thing, there's sustainability analytical solutions that, in North America, a lot of them based around LEED. I think there's some based on BREEAM in Europe. But the idea there is, we know there's a BIM model, we know there's other information. Let me give you a little database that pulls it all together and helps you to achieve your output, this example being a LEED output. And then lastly, once you have a comfort level around BIM, this example here is using Codebook, but it's any room data sheet. So just for everybody, and there'll be more on this when we do the asset management piece. I think it's 2 sessions or 3 sessions from now. But Codebook is a tool. There's a tool called Rufus. There's an internal IBI tool called RDS, stands for Room Data Sheets, and I'm sure there are others. The concept is, if you have rooms or spaces in a BIM model, so EcoSim, it's called this, oh goodness, it's a space. Revit, I think it's called a room or an area. It's defined within those spaces are supposed to be some type of components, furniture, equipment, electronics, whatever it is. The room data sheet looks at the space, analyzes the components, ensures everything's in the right spot, and provide the backbone database to monitor and manage the content that's supposed, or the assets that are supposed to be in that space. And some of the beauty there is with Codebook and Rufus, for example, we do some push-pull. So Codebook will say room X is supposed to have these 15 components. It will push them into the model so you have the 15 items that you can now spatially arrange. And then if you add any metadata or parameters to one of those 15 items, Codebook will pull them back into the database and you have a backbone database. So that's a pretty powerful tool. In the whole world of asset management, that opens up the possibility for a whole lot more. So if I have that database, I can then do something with it, which usually will go above and beyond architecture, but may fall within the overall realm of IBI's project management as a whole, extra value service to the client, or possibly just better our ability to manage information, make us that much more efficient, maybe make prototype rooms that can then be applied for subsequent projects, etc. So there's a lot of value there, but from the perspective of the architect, if you're sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, why? That's probably the reason. It's about that efficiency, seamlessness of information, communication with the client, etc. So there's a lot that can be done there. But again, it goes right back to that first slide of BIM, and it's about collaboration and planning. If you would use something like this, you gotta know why. Why are you doing it? Who is the consumer of the information? Are there any stakeholders? Does it bring value to me, the architect, maybe to my engineering consultants or joint venture? Is it just for the client? What's happening? And those questions have to be asked. There has to be somebody leading all of this as well in order to achieve this to succeed. So in closing, I just want to leave with consider those possibilities. So as an architect, if you've never been on a BIM project before, or you're looking at the first one, or you've looked back and said, we've done Revit a couple times, it's been horrible, it took way too long. We want to build the efficiency. So I always say take baby steps. So look at your first reasons why. Get in that modeling tool, get your output, make it more efficient. Make it happen. Use our IBI standards. Harness our content. If there's missing content, let me know, and I'll get it to the content team, and we'll make sure that we get the families and parts that we need to be there, so that you're quite literally assembling components, building your rooms and spaces, building your buildings, building your sites, and things are coming together. Review the model. So decision-making process. Forget about the struggles of software. Being able to sit down with your design team, whether it's just the architectural team or architects plus engineers, including your clients, that will go such a long way to get true and honest decisions, especially early in the project, and avoid later rework, again, unless a client says, thou shalt change, and we change, and hopefully we charge them for the change if it makes sense, etc. But let's get to that point so that all the other items around this wheel start to become a little more feasible. And that will only take time once those orange blocks are attacked and efficient, and there's a comfort level globally across this firm. So that sums up today's. So that was, again, we just did the third session. In 3 weeks, so it would be, I think, the second Monday of May, we're doing BIM for Engineers. I encourage everybody on this call, do phone into that as well, because we just look at it from the aspect of engineering, but the engineering impacts the architecture directly. So as I encourage the engineers to be on this call, please be on that call as well. And then we'll start getting into the details on, what do specs mean in the world of BIM, then the contractors and how do they look at BIM, and then my favorite is the asset management, and how do you start to take this information and spawn it on forward. And then obviously there's the rest to come. So with that, I'll pull up the questions, and I just wanted to remind everybody, again, put your AIA number into the system if you haven't already. Couple questions here. Can we get the PowerPoint after the class? Yes, all of the PowerPoints. I'll just very quickly, while I have everybody's attention here, there's the IBIU website. So when you get the message from, or the thank you message from IBIU, it'll actually contain a link to the presentation and the video. But if you go to the IBIU site under BIM, and then you select any one of the courses, so right now we just did BIM for Architects, but I'll just go the one from last week, it'll give you a link to the presentation and the video. And I just remembered the video itself, if you're using Chrome like I am, the video will not play in the browser. And for Chrome or Firefox, you've got to use Internet Explorer. How do you reconcile the need to have a rendered level of detail and wanting to reduce liability in terms over the modeling the BIM content? That's a very good question. For me, and actually, let me go back to this slide here, because I really, really like this example. So if you look at this, and I'll say from a purely architectural perspective, all I really need is a grade 1. If I'm modeling furniture in my room, I need to know that the chair is a chair. I need to know that it takes up X, Y, and Z dimensions. And that's it. That's all I need as an architect. I may spec it, I may not even spec it. But then we have to account. Well, I'm probably going to want to visualize it. And my client, if I'm giving it to somebody, they're not going to want to see that. They're going to want to see that. So it's a delicate line between what you model from a BIM perspective and then putting a little more detail for renderings versus maybe I just leave it like this and I hand it to an advanced visualization specialist. And I say, look, every time you see this, not only do I want that, but maybe a little more detail. So maybe there's a mesh backing and they're going to do some advanced thing in 3D Studio. In my BIM model, all I need is that to show up on my plan. So that's something to think about. But yeah, it's really, there's no right or wrong answer to that, but it's just making sure that, you know, the first time around you want to be as efficient as possible. But then if we have content, maybe the content can show this in 3D, but something simpler in 2D, depending on how the family is created. The session 1, somebody just asked, when will the session 1 quiz be available? For those who didn't watch it live. We're still working on the quizzes. I'm working with Jennifer Osler to get an online quiz set up. So that will be available in the near future. I'll try to get a timeline, but I don't have that today. Additional course consider would be IBI implemented workflows for BIM. Tangible, okay. So that's a good point from Jeff, and I think once we're done the more overviews of why you would use BIM, what I want to be careful of the IBIU course is not to get too much into detailed workflow, but when I get to those subsequent courses on how we're collaborating and implementing, we're going to have some, we'll definitely be touching on some workflows, especially during the latter half of these courses when we talk about how we're sharing content and modeling. So stay tuned for that. Any other questions or comments? Okay. If anything does come up, let me know. I'm just an email away. Certificates will be available, just like the other ones, shortly after. Later today, I'll give the registration list to IBIU, and they'll be processed accordingly. Okay, last call for questions. Oh, your AIA number, you submit it right there in the question pane. So I'll just, Jeff, if you have it on you, if you just want to submit a question, just submit your AIA number in the question pane. I won't close it up yet. Okay, so if you're, that's the other thing, yeah. So if you're in a room with other people, email the list of attendees plus their AIA numbers to IBIU. So it's IBIU@IBI.com, and then they'll be processed. Okay. Last call for questions and or AIA numbers. Okay, I'm stopping the recording.